Imagine this. You are standing at the precipice of a vast, echoing chasm, and at the bottom, a relentless craving swirls, a void that whispers promises of solace and oblivion. This is the inner landscape of the addict, a terrain Carl Jung explored with profound insight, suggesting that our deepest compulsions often spring from an unacknowledged yearning for wholeness, a search for the divine within. It's a powerful, often agonizing dance with the self, where the shadow, that repository of our unlit, unintegrated aspects, often takes the lead. What if the very thing that binds you, that relentless pull towards a destructive habit, is not merely a weakness but a distorted manifestation of an ancient, archetypal hunger? Consider the story of Elias, a man whose life, from the outside, appeared meticulously crafted. A successful architect, lauded for his precision and innovative designs, he lived in a minimalist apartment overlooking the city, every object carefully chosen, every surface gleaming. Yet, beneath this polished exterior, a different narrative unfolded. Elias was bound by an insatiable addiction to online gambling, a secret ritual performed in the dead of night, after his last design brief was filed, after the city lights began to dim. The thrill wasn't just in winning. It was in the escape, the complete absorption that silenced the persistent, nagging voice of his own inadequacy. He had built towering structures from steel and glass, but within himself, he felt like a house of cards, perpetually on the verge of collapse. His earliest memories were steeped in a quiet loneliness. His parents, both brilliant academics, found solace in their intellectual pursuits, leaving little room for the messy, emotional landscape of a child. Elias learned early to suppress his feelings, to present a facade of competence and self-sufficiency. Any hint of vulnerability was met with gentle but firm redirection towards productive tasks. A strong mind, his father would often say, is a disciplined mind. This constant emphasis on intellect and control inadvertently nurtured a deep, unacknowledged emotional wound. The boy who was never truly seen, never fully embraced for his raw, unedited self, grew into a man who sought control in every external aspect of his life, while his inner world remained a volatile, untamed wilderness. The seed of his addiction was planted subtly, a seemingly innocuous distraction during a particularly stressful period at work. A colleague, noticing Elias's heightened tension, offhandedly mentioned a new online poker site. "Just a bit of fun," he'd said. Elias, ever curious and drawn to systems, approached it like a complex architectural problem to be solved. He started with small bets, studying probabilities, analyzing patterns. The initial wins were exhilarating, not for the money, but for the validation, the feeling of mastering something, of exerting control in a chaotic world. It was a fleeting taste of power, a distorted echo of the innate drive for competence that William James described as a fundamental human need. As the stakes grew, so did the intensity of the experience. The digital felt of the cards, the rapid-fire calculations, the heart-pounding anticipation, it all provided an escape from the sterile perfection of his everyday existence. This wasn't merely about monetary gain. It was about the feeling. In those moments, absorbed in the game, the incessant self-criticism quieted, the gnawing sense of emptiness receded. It was a counterfeit individuation, a fabricated sense of wholeness found in the fleeting high, rather than in the arduous journey of self-discovery. This relentless pursuit of an external fix is a common thread in the addict's narrative, a subconscious attempt to fill an internal void, often rooted in early developmental experiences. Erikson's stages of psychosocial development highlight the critical importance of trust and autonomy in early childhood. For Elias, a perceived lack of these foundational elements likely contributed to his later struggles with self-worth and self-regulation. One evening, after a particularly devastating loss that saw him deplete a significant portion of his savings, Elias found himself staring at his reflection. His eyes, usually sharp and alert, were shadowed with exhaustion and a profound, desolate shame. He saw not the successful architect, but a stranger haggard and hollow. This was his moment of reckoning, a descent into the underworld of his own psyche. The polished facade had cracked, revealing the raw, wounded self beneath. He remembered a vivid dream from his childhood, one that had haunted him for years. He was trapped in a vast, empty hall, desperately searching for a door, but every wall stretched endlessly, featureless. Now, the dream felt terrifyingly real. His inner conflict manifested in subtle ways. He became increasingly isolated, declining social invitations, preferring the solitary ritual of his addiction. His once sharp wit dulled, replaced by a quiet preoccupation. Colleagues noticed his detachment, attributing it to overwork. Yet, beneath the surface, a battle raged. The rational mind, the ego, tried to assert control, to pull him back from the brink, but the compulsion, fueled by the unconscious yearning for escape and validation, proved a formidable opponent. It was as if his shadow self, unacknowledged and unintegrated for so long, had seized control, demanding its due. The pain, once a dull ache, became a searing fire. The losses mounted, not just financial, but a deeper loss of self-respect, of integrity. He began to lie to himself to justify his actions, a classic defense mechanism. The once clear boundaries between his professional and private life blurred, his focus at work waning, replaced by a constant internal monologue about his next gamble. It was a prison of his own making, a gilded cage forged from unaddressed psychological needs. The external success he had so meticulously cultivated felt like a cruel irony, a hollow triumph in the face of his inner turmoil. He was a master of blueprints, but he had no map for his own soul. This archetypal pattern of the addict, deeply rooted in the Jungian concept of the shadow, often emerges when individuals suppress vital aspects of themselves, particularly their emotional landscape. For Elias, the relentless pursuit of external perfection and intellectual prowess left little room for the messy, unpredictable world of feelings. The gambling became a substitute for genuine emotional engagement, a highly stimulating distraction from the deeper, more profound work of self-discovery and integration. His unconscious was calling for balance, for the acknowledgement of his unexpressed emotions, his vulnerabilities, his need for genuine connection. The addiction, in a paradoxical way, was a desperate attempt by his psyche to achieve a form of wholeness, albeit a destructive one. It was a twisted path to individuation, a journey where the shadow, instead of being integrated, had become the guiding force. The journey out of such a chasm demands a courageous confrontation with the parts of yourself you've disowned. It requires a descent into the very darkness you've tried to avoid, to understand the hunger that drives the compulsion. What comfort are you seeking? What pain are you avoiding? What forgotten part of yourself is crying out for recognition? Only by acknowledging these deeper needs can you begin to rewrite the script, to find genuine pathways to healing and integration. The solution isn't in battling the addiction directly in a war of wills, but in understanding its root, in embracing your shadow, and in seeking authentic connection and self-acceptance. You possess an innate capacity for resilience, a profound inner wisdom waiting to be rediscovered. Have you ever considered that the relentless pursuit of an external solution, be it a substance, a behavior, or even another person, is often a desperate attempt to compensate for a missing piece within yourself? Carl Jung posited that individuation, the lifelong process of integrating the conscious and unconscious aspects of the psyche, is paramount to psychological well-being. When this natural process is derailed, when we refuse to acknowledge and integrate our shadow, the unconscious finds other, often destructive, ways to manifest. It's as if a powerful, instinctual force, denied its rightful expression, turns inward, seeking solace in counterfeit forms. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. These profound words from Carl Jung resonate deeply with the archetype of the addict. Elias, in his meticulous life, had imagined himself a figure of light, disciplined, successful, in control. Yet, beneath this carefully constructed persona lurked an immense darkness, an unconscious void yearning for recognition. His addiction to gambling was not merely a habit. It was a desperate, if misguided, attempt to make that darkness conscious, to feel something in the sterile landscape of his suppressed emotions. The thrill of the win, the despair of the loss, these were intense emotional experiences, a stark contrast to the emotional flatness he had cultivated for so long. The story of Elias's childhood, with its emphasis on intellectual rigor over emotional expression, painted a vivid picture of how this darkness began to form. His parents, though well-meaning, inadvertently fostered a climate where feelings were seen as inconvenient, even irrational. When Elias would cry as a child, he wasn't met with comforting arms, but with logical explanations for why his tears were unnecessary, or suggestions for a productive activity to distract him. This subtle, yet consistent invalidation taught him that his emotional world was something to be tamed, to be hidden away. He learned to project his unmet emotional needs onto external achievements, striving for perfection in his architectural designs as a substitute for internal validation. This process of ego projection, where inner conflicts are attributed to external objects or situations, is a classic psychological defense. Elias was projecting his deep-seated feeling of inadequacy onto the world, then attempting to overcome it through external triumphs, ultimately fueling a cycle of unfulfillment. The gambling became a distorted mirror of his inner turmoil. Each bet was a gamble on his own worth, a desperate plea for a win that would somehow affirm his existence, his value. The fleeting moments of exhilaration were potent, providing a temporary reprieve from the gnawing emptiness. But like all shadow pursuits, the relief was ephemeral, followed by an even deeper plunge into despair. This cycle of seeking and failing to find lasting satisfaction is a hallmark of addiction, where the pursuit of an external fix perpetuates the very emptiness it seeks to fill. Albert Bandura's social learning theory highlights how individuals learn behaviors through observation and imitation, but also through direct experience and reinforcement. For Elias, the initial wins on the gambling sites provided powerful positive reinforcement, imprinting the behavior and making it incredibly difficult to extinguish, even in the face of mounting negative consequences. The brain, seeking pleasure and avoiding pain, became conditioned to associate the act of gambling with a false sense of gratification. As his addiction deepened, Elias found himself increasingly alienated, not just from others, but from himself. He developed a remarkable ability to compartmentalize, maintaining his professional facade while his personal life spiraled into chaos. His colleagues and clients saw the brilliant architect. His inner world was a tormented mess. This stark dichotomy is a testament to the powerful hold of the shadow, operating unseen, yet profoundly influencing behavior. He lived in a state of constant internal vigilance, his energy consumed by the effort of maintaining appearances and feeding his compulsion. The constant mental calculations, the endless strategizing of his next move, kept his mind perpetually engaged, distracting him from the deeper, more uncomfortable truths about his emotional neglect. Carl Rogers, with his emphasis on unconditional positive regard and self-actualization, would argue that Elias's early environment lacked the crucial elements for him to develop a healthy sense of self-worth. Without feeling truly seen and accepted for who he was, flaws and all, he struggled to develop an internal compass for his own value. This led him to seek external validation, and when that validation felt insufficient, the addiction stepped in to provide a synthetic version. The gambling became a perverse form of self-soothing, a way to regulate intense emotions that he had never learned to process in a healthy manner. He was, in essence, trying to fill an unfillable void with something external, a fleeting gratification that only exacerbated the underlying emptiness. The concept of the Anima/Animus, Jung's representation of the unconscious feminine/masculine qualities within the psyche, offers another lens through which to view Elias's struggle. His relentless logical and controlled exterior, a highly developed masculine persona, seemed to have overshadowed and repressed his inner feminine qualities: intuition, emotionality, connection, and vulnerability. The gambling, with its chaotic, unpredictable nature, was perhaps a desperate, unconscious attempt to reconnect with that unexpressed feminine aspect, to experience raw emotion, even if it was destructive. It was a yearning for balance, a craving for the wild, untamed aspects of life that his ordered existence had denied him. The true work of healing, then, is not merely to cease the addictive behavior, but to embark on a profound journey of individuation. It demands a courageous descent into the personal unconscious, to confront the disowned parts of the self, to integrate the shadow. It asks you to inquire, what emotional needs were unmet in your formative years? What authentic expressions of self have you suppressed? What parts of your being have you deemed unworthy of light? Only by acknowledging and embracing these fragmented pieces can you begin to weave a tapestry of wholeness, to become the integrated individual you are meant to be. This path requires a willingness to feel the discomfort, to sit with the pain, and to lovingly embrace all that you are, even the parts you have long denied. What if the very discomfort you feel, the gnawing anxiety or persistent emptiness, isn't a sign of brokenness, but a potent signal from your deeper self, urging you toward transformation? The journey from the clutches of addiction to authentic liberation often begins with this profound realization that true freedom isn't found in escaping reality, but in embracing it in all its raw, unfiltered truth. It is here that we encounter the profound wisdom of Stoicism, a philosophy that, at its heart, champions inner resilience and the acceptance of what lies within our control and what does not. We suffer more often in imagination than in reality. This timeless insight from Seneca, one of the great Stoic philosophers, speaks directly to the core of the addict's struggle. Elias's suffering, while manifesting in the real-world consequences of his gambling, was largely fueled by an internal narrative of inadequacy, a fear of vulnerability, and an imaginative projection of what he lacked. He imagined a life where he was perpetually falling short, and the gambling became a desperate, albeit futile, attempt to outrun this perceived deficiency. The external losses were painful, yes, but the deeper agony stemmed from the internal landscape of his unacknowledged fears and unintegrated self. His constant mental battles were a form of psychological self-torture, where the imagined consequences of his inherent flaws were far more terrifying than the actual ones. One stark winter morning, after yet another night lost to the digital tables, Elias hit rock bottom. He hadn't just lost money. He'd lost his sense of time, missing an important meeting with a client, something unheard of for him. The phone calls from his assistant went unanswered. His reputation, meticulously built, now trembled on the brink. As the dawn light filtered through his blinds, illuminating the detritus of his night, empty coffee cups, crumpled bills, the cold glow of his laptop screen, a suffocating wave of despair washed over him. But this time, something was different. Instead of the usual frantic urge to win back what he'd lost, there was a profound stillness, a strange, almost liberating emptiness. It was the calm before a storm, or perhaps, the profound silence after one. He recalled a recurring image from his childhood dreams, not the empty hall, but a tiny, forgotten garden, hidden behind a crumbling wall. In the dream, he always felt an inexplicable pull towards it, a sense of peace just beyond his reach. Now, in his moment of absolute defeat, that image resurfaced, imbued with a newfound significance. It was an archetypal longing for nurture, for growth, for a connection to something vital and real, a concept echoing Carl Rogers' emphasis on self-actualization and the inherent human drive towards growth. The turning point wasn't a sudden epiphany, but a quiet decision born from exhaustion. He called his assistant, not to apologize with excuses, but with a raw, honest admission of a problem he couldn't control. The act of voicing his vulnerability, of shedding the impenetrable mask of perfection, was terrifying, yet paradoxically, it was the first true breath he had taken in years. This act of radical honesty with another person, and more importantly, with himself, was the initial tremor of his self-worth re-emerging from the rubble. He sought help, not in the frantic search for another quick fix, but in the arduous, patient work of therapy. In the safe space of the consulting room, he began the difficult process of shadow work. He revisited his childhood not to blame, but to understand the genesis of his emotional suppression. He unearthed the buried feelings of inadequacy, the fear of not being enough, the profound loneliness that had driven him to seek solace in the sterile thrill of the gamble. He learned to identify the subtle emotional cues his body had been sending him for years, cues he had diligently ignored. This deep dive into his personal history, guided by the principles of trauma psychology, allowed him to connect his current struggles to the unresolved pain of his past. He discovered that the relentless drive for control in his professional life was a compensatory mechanism for the lack of emotional control he felt internally. The gambling, in its chaos, was a perverse mirror of that underlying disorder. As he began to acknowledge and integrate these fragmented parts of himself, the compulsive urge to gamble began to lose its grip. It wasn't a linear process. There were relapses, moments of intense craving, but each time, he returned to the work, fortified by a growing understanding of himself and a burgeoning sense of self-compassion. This journey is a testament to the power of individuation, the lifelong process of integrating the conscious and unconscious aspects of the psyche. For Elias, it meant acknowledging his shadow, his fears, his vulnerabilities, his suppressed anger, and bringing these aspects into the light of conscious awareness. He began to explore healthy outlets for the emotions he had long denied: meditation for stillness, vigorous exercise to channel his intensity, and, eventually, a renewed engagement with his passion for architecture, not as a means of external validation, but as a genuine expression of his creative self. He started sketching again, not for clients but for the sheer joy of creation, allowing for imperfections, for the spontaneous flow of ideas. The ultimate liberation from the grip of the archetype of the addict lies not in eradicating the underlying desires, but in understanding them, integrating them, and redirecting their powerful energy towards wholesome pursuits. It is about understanding that the yearning for wholeness, the deep desire for connection and meaning, is not a flaw, but an inherent human drive. When this drive is distorted, it manifests as addiction. When it is honored and consciously pursued, it leads to profound healing and self-realization. You possess the innate capacity to transform your pain into purpose, your shadows into wisdom. The journey inward, though challenging, is the most profound pilgrimage you will ever undertake. Embrace the stillness within, for it is in that quiet space that true power and authentic rebirth reside. What one courageous step will you take today to reclaim the sovereign territory of your own soul? Please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Share this video with other friends to spread valuable insights in life. Thank you for listening. The END.